Why did the forest choose Muskān twice? Sparkles, what if the first true mother wasn't human? What if compassion could bloom on wings, not wombs? In a time when the earth still whispered secrets only the wind could carry, a forest kept a truth older than mankind. And one quiet afternoon, under the hush of ancient trees, a creature who had never given birth discovered what it truly meant to be a mother. Long ago, before humanity's footsteps silenced the breath of the earth, the deep green forests held sacred truths known only to the trees and animals. Back then, the wind didn't groan with pollution but whispered with the voices of ancient spirits. Leaves could speak. Roots could remember. And somewhere among the trees, there was a silver-threaded path that ran through the heart of the forest, only visible to those whose hearts were pure enough to see it. It was on this path that a meeting occurred, not between kings or saints, but between an abandoned infant and a bird who had never known what it meant to be a mother. The story begins one late afternoon, as the sun dipped behind towering treetops and the last beads of mist clung to the leaves. A pair of peafowls, a majestic male and a somber female, walked slowly along the banks of a dry creek. The male peacock moved with pride, as if he had conquered storms. The female, however, walked slower, her eyes deep and quiet, carrying a sorrow from lifetimes past. The peacock held his head high, tail feathers slightly fanned, so beautiful even wildflowers seemed to blush. But the peahen didn't look at the flowers. Her gaze was fixed on the low bushes beside the trail, where the wind carried an unfamiliar message, a faint cry for help. And then, a cry. A fragile, broken, trembling cry like the breath of a newborn leaf falling to cold earth. The peahen froze. Her eyes widened. Her head turned toward the sound. Her feet seemed rooted by a powerful instinct. The peacock turned, wary. His glance said, "Let's go." The forest at dusk isn't safe for curiosity, it could be a trap. But the peahen didn't move. She stepped toward the cry, each step awakening a buried memory within her. Then she saw it. A tiny body, caked in cold mud, lay motionless on the dry forest floor. A human child. Eyes shut, lips trembling from the cold. So delicate, any predator could have ended its life in a second. The peahen approached, hesitant, yet resolute. She lowered her head and gently touched the baby's cheek with her warm beak. A flicker of warmth. A weak breath. Still alive. "Don't get involved with human matters," the peacock warned from afar. "It's not our place." But the peahen didn't respond. A silent tear welled in her eye, not for the baby, but for herself. For all the nests she built in vain, for all the eggs that never hatched. She had longed to be a mother. The skies had never answered. Until now. She bent lower, spread her wings, and enveloped the child as if it were the answer to lifetimes of longing, the karma summoned by her aching heart. This baby hadn't come by chance. Her yearning to be a mother had reached the universe, and the universe answered. The peacock stood silent. No one had ever told him a bird could love a human child. But love doesn't need permission. The peahen gently lifted the child in her wings, softer than silk, warmer than dawn. She turned and walked, not back to her old nest, but deeper into the forest. Into the unknown. Into darkness that didn't scare her anymore. Because in her heart now, there was no space for fear. Only one truth remained: she would protect this child no matter the cost. Night fell. An owl cried in the distance. But under the peahen's feathers, the baby slept soundly. No cries. No sighs. Only warmth, like the earth whispering, "Mama is here now, my child." When the forest was fully draped in night and every leaf began to hum its own story in the wind, A humble nest lined with dry grass and fallen leaves began to glow with new life. Inside that fragile shelter lay a trembling, blue-cheeked infant. Abandoned. Human. Weak. The peahen, who had never laid an egg, didn't blink. Her round eyes glistened with both fear and resolve. From the moment she touched the child's cheek, she had entered a path with no return. And she didn't regret it. The child's breaths were shallow and faint. Then came the voice of the peacock from behind an old mulberry tree. "What are you doing? That's a human. They don't belong in our world." The peahen didn't turn. She pulled her wings tighter around the baby, as if one word could steal its fragile life. "She's cold," she replied, not with words, but in the sacred language of those who have lived close to nature. "If I don't warm her, she'll die." The peacock stepped closer. His eyes were no longer scornful, but unsure. "Why? She's not yours. No feathers. No beak. She'll grow up strange. She'll leave you." The peahen looked at the child. Her tiny eyes barely open, clinging to life by a thread. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Some things don't need to be right, they just need to be loved. Memories surged. Nests built from roots, dreams of eggs never laid. Nights weeping alone under the canopy while the grass grew fresh but her heart wilted. And now, fate had placed a soul in her care, not for play, but for motherhood. But how to keep the baby alive? She had no milk. No human food. She couldn't leave the child to forage. Despair surged like a flood. Then a rustle in the eastern trees. She looked up. An old monkey, gray and hollow-eyed, appeared. A mother who had just lost her baby. They looked at each other. Two different species. No shared tongue. No shared blood. Yet in that moment, something sacred passed between them. Each saw the same sorrow mirrored in the other, one who had never been a mother, and one who had just lost her child. No words were needed. The peahen gently placed the child at the monkey's feet. The monkey knelt. Her eyes shimmered. She reached out, touched the infant's skin, and pulled the baby to her chest. A miracle happened. Though her own child was gone, milk flowed. From a body in grief, warmth poured into a child brought by wings. The peahen stepped back, overwhelmed. In her heart, a voice echoed. All sentient beings, regardless of form, can become mothers, if they carry compassion. The baby suckled softly. The sound melted into the song of crickets, rustling leaves, and forest breeze. Even the peacock fell silent. He could no longer deny it. Love, true love, can come from anywhere. And it can save even those once discarded. At dawn, the baby opened her eyes. Clear, like morning dew. The peahen named her Muskān because for the first time in years, she saw a smile. A weak, tiny smile, but real. And from that day forward, Muskān became the heart of the forest's new story. A human child, raised on monkey's milk, sheltered by peacock wings, and held by the fragrant breath of the woods. As the sun began to slip behind the distant treetops, its final light turned the old leaves red gold. The peahen had flown over 5 hills and crossed 3 valleys before she finally dared to land in a secluded forest glade untouched by human footsteps, where only the sound of flowing water and sheltering branches remained. Muskān, the tiny child, had fallen asleep from exhaustion. Her sleep was uneasy, disturbed by wing beats, the whipping wind through trees, and the racing breath of her feathered mother. The peahen gently laid the child down into a nest of damp moss. She shook out her wings to cast off dry leaves, then wrapped her body over Muskān like a soft, breathing blanket. This time, she didn't tremble from fear, but from a deeper realization. To love is not enough. To protect, one must also be wise. The forest was no longer the same. Since Muskān arrived, the rhythm of nature had shifted. The dense shrubs that once gave safe shelter now bore signs of human passage. Trees that once held only birds and monkeys now bore rope marks and the glint of binoculars. Not because the child was harmful, but because humans couldn't accept a miracle that defied their understanding. The peahen knew if she kept hiding, it would only be a matter of time before they were found. She needed a place not just remote, but hidden. Not just safe, but sacred. Then, in the stillness beside the stream, a memory surfaced: the valley of the endless, where plants never died, and winds never grew too wild. A place said to be found only by beings without anger or greed. She had to go there. She had to take Muskān. But even animals feared that path. There were no signs, no trails, and it was said to be a place for those who have abandoned all fear. The peahen looked down at Muskān. Though the child's eyes were shut, dry tears still marked her cheeks. She could not allow this child to grow up running, hiding, being seen as someone's possession. She had to lead her to a place where love required no justification. And so, the journey began. The next morning, before sunlight could pierce the thick forest canopy, the peahen placed Muskān on her back and began the long journey. She didn't fly, she walked. Because the path to the valley of the endless lay not in the skies, but in the humility of the earth, in patience, silence, and surrender. Along the way, the peahen taught Muskān how to read the wind to sense where the forest grew deepest, how to recognize healing herbs, how to avoid venomous anthills, and how to be still when danger whispered in the air. Muskān couldn't yet form words, but her eyes listened. Her tiny hands gripped the peahen's feathers whenever clouds gathered. One day, while resting under an ancient banyan tree, a cobra slithered by. The peahen spread her wings over Muskān, eyes unblinking. But the snake didn't strike. It paused, looked into her eyes, then turned and disappeared. A deep intuition rose within her. The forest was beginning to accept Muskān. She was no longer a stranger. She was becoming part of its pulse, a different kind of sapling, yet cherished by courage. The peahen silently recited in her heart, "We don't choose where we are born, but we can choose where we belong." That night, beside a stream, as Muskān slept, the peahen meditated beneath the stars peeking through the leaves. She whispered without realizing, "If in this life I am a mother, may I have the wisdom to protect her beyond instinct. And if she returns as human in another life, may she remember, a bird once risked everything to love her unconditionally." A single dewdrop fell. No one could say if it came from her feathers, or her eyes. But peace, as always, is fragile. Before dawn could crown the hilltops, strange noises shook the forest, not the sound of deer or chattering squirrels, but of men, in boots. 3 large men entered the forest, rugged and silent, rifles slung across their backs. They followed the lead of a woman, her eyes disordered, filled not with remorse, but fear. She was the same girl who once left Muskān behind, not returning out of love, but dread. Fear that the past might resurface. That her secret would destroy everything she tried to preserve. The man walking beside her, the one who'd planned the abandonment, spoke in the chill of morning. "If someone sees her alive, if she returns to the village, everything's over. Our future, reputation, family, it's gone." The woman whispered, panicked, "So what do we do? If she's alive, if she speaks?" The man gestured coldly, Then we make sure she doesn't speak." The hunters behind them sneered. To them, dealing with a bird or an undocumented child was no different than shooting deer. No sound. No trace. Elsewhere in the forest, the peahen and Muskān rested beneath an old pine tree. The wind stung, but the warmth of feathers kept the child asleep. That day, something changed in Muskān's face. She murmured, "Mama." The peahen froze. One word. Broken. Mispronounced. But a word meant only for her a child's cry to a mother without human speech. A tear slipped from the peahen's eye, not from sudden emotion, but from truth. Motherhood had been acknowledged. By language. By heart. But the moment was short-lived. The wind shifted. A foreign scent crept in through the moss. Gunpowder. The peahen lifted her head. Stillness. She didn't need to see, she knew. Danger was near. No more running. She could not flee forever. Muskān could not keep being pushed deeper into the wild, because humans would always follow, this time with cruelty and cunning. She gently hid Muskān in a hollow tree, lined it with soft leaves, and whispered in the breath of a mother, "Stay still. I will come back." Then she soared upward, looping through the sky, circling to draw attention away from her child. Below, the hunters closed in. "See anything?" one asked, crouching to pick up some feathers. "Peahen feathers," he smirked. "Very close." The woman clung to the man's back. Silent. Her eyes no longer only guilty but torn. Each step toward the child was a step deeper into her own moral ruin. And then, a cry echoed through the canopy. Not quite bird. Not quite beast. A sorrowful, defiant call. The peahen circled above, luring them away from Muskān. "Up there. In the trees. Get your guns," shouted one of the hunters. The peahen dipped low, then soared high again, keeping her eyes fixed on the direction of her child. If she could hold their attention long enough, maybe Muskān could escape. Maybe someone, some soul of the forest would see her. And then, the unexpected happened. A gong rang from the eastern woods, a sound used only by the native forest dwellers, the guardians of the sacred lands. The hunters froze. "There are tribesmen nearby." The woman trembled. "We can't get caught here." From the mist emerged a figure, the old woodcutter, eyes sharp as ever. He stepped out from behind a fallen log, stared at the peahen, then at the hunters. "I know what you came for. But that child, she belongs to this forest now." The man tried to argue. But the old man raised something, a tiny silver bracelet. The one Muskān wore the day she was abandoned. "This is proof. I am the witness. I saw you. You no longer have the right to go near her." The peahen landed softly on the old man's shoulder, declaring a sacred alliance between creature and compassionate man. Noon fell. The sun filtered through the canopy in needle-thin rays, stitching light across the mossy ground. The wind stopped. The trees held their breath. An ancient forest awaited a never-seen standoff. The woodcutter, once just a quiet keeper of memories, stood unmoved. Not a warrior, not young. But his gaze, honed by winters of silence, was sharp as flint. He stood between the peahen and the men, guns, knives, greed veiled in reasons like protecting the secret. "You have nowhere left to go," he said, steady. "The forest knows. And the forest will not stay silent." One hunter spat. "Old man, you're playing with your life. That child, what is she to you?" "Nothing," the old man replied. "But she means everything to what matters most. justice, and compassion. Elsewhere. Muskān opened her eyes. She didn't know why her mother was gone. Didn't understand the rumbling in the distance. But her eyes held trust, faith that her mother would come back. Always. The moss still held the warmth of feathers. She crawled out of the hollow, clutching a soft peacock feather like a silent promise. She whispered, "Mama, where are you?" The wind answered gently like a lullaby. Back to the confrontation. The woman, no longer hiding, stepped forward, conflicted. Memories returned. Giving birth in the bushes. The child's first gaze not with tears, but a question. "Why didn't you hold me?" She trembled. I can't kill her," she blurted. "What?" the man snapped. "I saw her. She's alive." She smiled. "She has a mother now, not us. But let her live." The man growled, raising his gun. But before he could pull the trigger, a blur of feathers struck. The peahen. Not fleeing, fighting. She struck his arm. The gun dropped. She twisted, shielding the woodcutter with her wings. Her eyes flamed, no longer bird-like, but a mother's divine fury. The old man laid a hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to fight alone." From the bushes, others emerged, native forest guardians. Painted in earth tones. Silent but firm. One hunter paled. "We should go. This isn't worth it." Too late. One of the natives spoke in an ancient tongue. "Those who leave today in peace may live. If they abandon evil. Those who stay in cruelty will be swallowed by the forest." The woman collapsed, weeping. "Forgive us. I'm not worthy to be her mother. But she has one now. A true mother." The peahen didn't speak. She only watched. Then, she nodded. The wind breathed again. The forest sighed in relief. The sun broke through the clouds. Muskān appeared. She didn't cry. She toddled through the damp grass, tiny feet covered in dirt, a peacock feather clutched tightly in her hand. Without hesitation, she ran to the peahen, wrapped her arms around her neck, and nuzzled her face into the soft, thick feathers. Just like any child would do with their mother's hair. Silence fell over everyone. The woman, the one who had once left the child behind, watched, and tears streamed down her face. But not out of guilt. Rather, because of a truth she could no longer deny. "I gave birth to her, but she was reborn through the love of something not even human." From that day forward, the forest changed. No longer just a silent refuge for the small and voiceless. It became a home. A place where a human child and a mother with wings had somehow reconnected the sacred thread between nature and mankind. The forest dwellers retreated quietly back to their homes. But before leaving, they gave the old woodcutter a necklace made of sacred tree bone and river stone. A symbol of honor and remembrance. Give it to the child when she's old enough to understand, she doesn't belong to one species. She belongs to the entire forest. And thus, the tale of the peahen and the human child Muskān was passed from village to village, whispered beside campfires and in morning mist. No one knew exactly where the child had come from. But they all remembered her eyes. So peaceful, as if she carried the breath of the forest within her. The early years, a child and her winged mother. Muskān didn't grow up with plastic toys, coloring books, or school notebooks. But she had something better, a forest for a classroom. The peahen was her teacher. Rain was her music. Leaves were her books written in silence and instinct instead of ink. The peahen taught her everything not through speech, but through living example. When the wind howled, Mother spread her wings to shield her. When the river rose, Mother led her across the high stones. When a snake slithered near, Mother stayed silent, then gently nudged her away. Each day, Muskān learned a little more about the rhythm of the forest. She didn't just remember trails. She felt when a doe was about to give birth, when red ants needed space, or when an old gibbon cried alone because the rains had come. But his mate had not. One day, walking by the stream, Muskān stopped. She picked up a broken tree branch and gently packed mud around its wound. The peahen tilted her head and understood. The girl was learning to heal. The woodcutter returned. Months after the confrontation, the old man came back. He brought no axe. Only a pouch of herbs, a few seeds, and a bundle of fragrant grass. He knelt beside Muskān, who was playing near an anthill, and smiled. I've never seen ants pause from biting, just to smile at a child. The peahen landed on his shoulder. A ritual now, between two who had once stood together before danger. I've come with an offer for the girl. He built a small shelter beneath the ancient banyan tree. No nails. No sawn wood. Only fallen branches, loose stones, and leaves. This will be a school, he said. A place between humans and the forest. Muskān will be the bridge. From then on, he taught her daily. How to grind bark to reduce fever. How to boil leaves to repel mosquitoes. How to pack wounds with ash. And each time he taught, the peahen was always there, as if watching over her daughter with the quiet intensity of a guardian spirit. And one day, she sang. When Muskān turned 8, on a foggy autumn morning, before the sun had even risen, she stood on a forest path, arms outstretched like wings, and sang. No melody, no words, no rhythm, but clear like the first spring water breaking free from stone. The peahen watched from above, eyes glistening. The old woodcutter pressed his hand to his chest, his heart beating in rhythm with a song no human had taught her, but the forest had. And Muskān sang with everything the woods had whispered to her over the years. That love needs no language. That to protect someone doesn't require being of the same species. That even the abandoned can become beacons of light if they are kept warm at the right time. A seedling had taken root. But could the forest protect her forever? That night, as the peahen covered Muskān in sleep, rain fell. Not natural rain, but the kind that came with premonition. Something from outside the forest was coming. Not animals. Humans. Bearing banners, horses, and titles. Muskān was growing. And the world beyond the trees, the world that once rejected her, was returning. At dawn. Before the forest had fully awakened. Hoofbeats rustled dry leaves from the east. Not thundering like raiders, but slow, heavy. Like a question carried on horseback. Beneath thick branches, a quiet procession approached. At the front, a tall man in a deep purple cloak, his face sharply defined. But his eyes were not cold like those of royalty. They surged. Longed. Prince Arsalan. The only son of the king. Years ago, he was injured on a hunt, saved by a strange girl. Since returning to the palace, he hadn't stopped dreaming of her. A girl with eyes like rivers, and laughter like wind. But he hadn't come back for love alone. He came for the question that haunted him. Who was she? Deep in the forest, Muskān sat by the stream, twirling a red almond leaf between her fingers. Now 13, she had grown into a young woman. Her hands lined with scars from grinding herbs, tending fires, and nursing forest animals. The peahen perched high above, a quiet unease rising in her chest. The forest had been too silent lately. Foxes hid. Owls called less. And the scent of human skin, the kind that once marked tragedy, was riding the morning winds again. Muskān looked up. "Mother, what is it?" The peahen didn't reply. But she circled above her daughter's head, wings tight. A silent warning. "You're no longer a child. But the forest is still full of danger." The prince had reached the forest's edge. He signaled for the escort to stop. "I'll go alone." His guard protested. "Your Highness, the woods are deep and wild. What if?" Arsalan smiled. "She who saved me carried no sword. But her eyes had more strength than any army." He stepped into the woods, treading softly, not wishing to wake anything. He passed the very spot where he had once bled. He saw familiar signs. A vine-wrapped branch, a bamboo cup still stained with water. Then he saw a small hut tucked between the valley trees. The reunion, 5 years later. Muskān was tending to a wounded deer. At the sound of approaching footsteps, she looked up. Her eyes widened. But there was no fear. Arsalan stopped a few steps from her, removed his cloak, and bowed. "Hello, Muskān." She didn't answer right away. One hand still held the medicine to the deer's lips. Then softly, "You remember my name?" "How could I forget the name of the one who saved my life and taught me how to listen to my own heartbeat?" A silence lingered. Then she whispered, "Who are you, really?" He looked up, eyes glowing. "Someone searching for a memory no dream has ever been able to reach." The peahen appeared. She landed between them. Wings spread wide. Not hostile, but fiercely protective. To her, anyone entering Muskān's life had to pass through a mother's heart. Arsalan knelt. "I haven't come to take her away. I came to ask for permission to understand her." Such simple words. No flattery. No arrogance. And that made the peahen close her wings and tilt her head. In that moment, Muskān said, "Mother, this is the one I told you about. The man hurt by a wild boar. The one who once called me light, in a night of storm." The old woodcutter stepped out. His hair now whiter, but his back still straight. Seeing the prince, he nodded. "Good. You kept your word. No guards. No speeches. Only your heart." Arsalan smiled. "I came to listen. Then listen from the beginning. About a baby abandoned. A peahen who could not lay eggs. Milk that came from a grieving monkey. And a forest that raised a child into a young woman. With nothing but what humans call a miracle." When the sun rose past the canopy and golden light painted sacred patterns on the forest floor, Prince Arsalan sat quietly in front of the small thatched hut. No velvet throne, no perfumed drapes, just a flat stone and the breeze scented with wild grass. And yet, he had never felt so free. The old woodcutter, carefully washing healing leaves in a bowl, continued his story, the part only he had witnessed. It had no wars. No glittering magic like those in the royal scrolls. But it moved the prince's heart in a way the crown never had. Arsalan looked up toward Muskān, who was playing near the pond, her hand skimming across the surface. Sunlight touched her cheek, revealing eyes not hardened by power, but calmed by love. The prince finally spoke. Muskān. I won't ask about your past. I've heard enough. But now I want to ask you, if the world were to learn about you, would you be afraid? Muskān didn't turn around. She simply whispered. I'm not afraid of them. I'm only afraid that if they find out I'm different, they'll try to change me into something I'm not. Even the peahen paused at those words. She slowly stepped beside Muskān and rested her head on her daughter's shoulder. A gesture of silent, unconditional support. Arsalan bowed his head. Then, if the world could hear your story spoken in your own voice, unedited, unpainted, untamed, would you speak? Muskān turned. Her eyes held no suspicion, no excitement. Only stillness. The kind only a forest can teach a child from birth. Then she nodded. I will speak. But not for the palace. Not for history books. I'll speak, for the children no one waits for outside hospital doors. For the mothers who feed their babies with cold rice. And for the forgotten souls swallowed by crowds. The first goodbye. Prince Arsalan stood before the hut, holding a simple satchel Muskān had packed herself. No jewels. Just a small bottle of forest spring water, a pouch of dried healing leaves, and a single peacock feather. The peahen flew to a nearby branch. She didn't cry. She didn't protest. She simply stood like a mother watching her daughter step into another life. I'll return, Arsalan promised. With a place worthy of hearing your story. Not as a prince, but as someone who was once healed. Muskān didn't speak. She simply placed her hand over her heart where it still beat quietly. And whispered. I was never born into a kingdom. But if the hearts of that kingdom truly have a place for me, then I will come. The story spread not by sword, but by wind. The prince returned to the palace in silence. But something in his eyes had changed. He no longer rushed. No longer gave rehearsed speeches to the court. Instead, he built a reading hall made of forest wood. No throne, no guards. Just seats for villagers, where they were invited to tell their own stories. One day, he stood before a crowd. You will hear a story of a child not born into silk, but raised by the love of a bird. A child who didn't know her father's name, nor her mother's face, yet understands family more deeply than we do. The people were quiet, curious, and then, they began to ask, who is Muskān? The forest stirred. The peahen grew restless. Since the prince had left, the forest had not been still. Rabbits, once shy, came close to Muskān. Squirrels began offering fruits at her doorstep. Trees shifted quicker. And the peahen each night flew 3 circles above the nest, as if sensing that something immense was on its way. One day, a royal envoy arrived. But not to seize Muskān. To invite her. Not for honor, but to listen. The hut beneath the banyan was suddenly too small. Not because of people, but because a decision had arrived. Muskān stood silently at the doorway. In front of her stood the royal delegation. Not sword-bearing guards, but elegant, soft-spoken nobles. Bowing as if greeting a revered elder, not a child of the wild. We come on behalf of Her Majesty the Queen, said the old envoy. You are invited to the palace not as a subject, not as a curiosity, but to tell your story before the royal family, the people, and history itself. Muskān did not answer immediately. Her gaze drifted beyond the thatched roof, toward the forest behind, where the peahen flew in slow circles, as if her wings were caught in a silent paradox. The peahen looked at her daughter for the first time, not in love, but in fear. Ever since she took Muskān under her wing, she had never imagined this day would come. A day her daughter would leave. Not to run, but to walk toward light. She was afraid. Not of losing Muskān, but of the world outside. So cold, sharp, judgmental. Would it ruin what the forest had carefully nurtured? But she said nothing. Because since the day Muskān learned to speak, they both knew. Words aren't the only way to understand. The peahen stepped forward, pressed her head to her daughter's chest. Muskān embraced her mother's neck. And together, their eyes turned toward the distance. No words were needed. If you go, I won't stop you. But know this place will always wait for you. The woodcutter broke the silence. He placed a hand on Muskān's shoulder. You don't have to choose between the forest and the palace. You were born without a place. But you can choose where you'll create meaning. What if they don't believe me? Muskān whispered. Then let them not believe. You only need to speak with truth. Like the day you first blew through a leaf to make music. Whether the wind listened or not. And so, Muskān left the forest. She brought little. A woven grass satchel. A handful of healing herbs. And the bone necklace gifted by the forest tribes when she was a child. She bowed to the hut once her home, her school, her hospital. The first place she learned what it meant not to be abandoned. The peahen flew down and perched softly on her shoulder. Then, with her beak, she handed Muskān the longest feather from her tail, offering a piece of herself. The royal palace too bright. For the first time, Muskān entered the place once so far away. But she did not tremble. She wasn't dazzled by jewels or velvet rugs. She observed like studying a new kind of tree. To be understood, not obeyed. Inside the grand hall, surrounded by silk-robed nobles and guards with polished swords, she walked calmly. Not bowed. Not defiant. Just walked. As she always had through the forest. The queen stood and approached. Not with regal command, but with the eyes of a mother who once lost a child. You don't need to call me anything, she said softly. But today, you're the only one here with the right to be heard. Muskān spoke. Of the first night on moss, beneath wings. Of the grieving monkey who shared her milk. Of fevers with no thermometer, only warm feathers against a forehead. Of moonlight as a study lamp, and owls as lullabies. And of the time humans returned. Not to rescue, but to erase. The room fell silent. She didn't cry. But when she spoke of the peahen, her eyes welled. Like the first time the sky wept because her mother was late returning home. A truth no one expected. The queen brought out a silver bracelet. Do you recognize this? Muskān froze. It was the bracelet found by the woodcutter long ago. Worn by a newborn in the forest. Then came a sketch. Of a missing royal child from 13 years prior. A girl born of the queen's estranged sister, from a forbidden love with a poor servant. Everything matched. The palace stirred. But Muskān asked just one question. If I am blood, what do I gain? And if I'm not, what do I lose? That night, in a marble chamber of the royal wing, Muskān sat alone. No one forced a title on her. No one demanded obedience. But silence and expectation became an invisible chain. More delicate than iron, but far more dangerous. Outside, nobles whispered. If she's truly royal, we can use her tale to showcase compassion. If she refuses, even better, freedom makes the crown look noble. Either way, we win. Muskān knew. Not because she was eavesdropping. The forest had taught her to listen not with ears, but with soul. The queen came that night. She wore no jewels. Only a coarse sweater, one she had once knit for a child never allowed into the palace. She sat down, neither close nor far. "Muskān," she said, "I won't claim you if that hurts you. But if you choose to leave, I ask only one thing." Muskān turned. "What is it, ma'am?" "Please, don't disappear again. You don't have to be a princess. But don't let your story become a myth. Let it live. Through your truth, your choices, your freedom." The next morning, Muskān was gone. All they found was a small note left on the table in the great hall. "I am not your blood. I don't need your crown. I am the daughter of a peahen. And I will rewrite history. Not with ink, but with how I live. Don't keep me in your royal museum. Let me return and plant seeds where no one yet dares call home." And she did return, but not alone. 1 year later, at the southern edge of the forest, a school appeared. Built from bamboo and clay. No flags. But hundreds of children arrived. From poor villages, orphanages, even war zones. Each day, they wrote with sticks on dirt. They learned to read from birds' eyes. They learned love from the silence of trees. And standing among them was Muskān. Not as a teacher, but as the survivor of compassion. The prince returned again. Not to take her away, but to stay. He came one rainy afternoon, carrying nothing but a blank book. "Will you write your story here?" he asked. Muskān smiled gently. "I don't need a book. I have the forest. I have my students. And I have my mother. The peahen who still returns every sunset, landing on the classroom roof like a bell signaling the end of the day. The peahen's final message. No one heard it. But on the day Muskān placed a small stone marker beneath the ancient banyan tree, the very spot where she had once been left in a basket, the wind suddenly blew fiercely, then went still. The elders in the village said, "The mother bird has flown far. Not because she's abandoned her child, but because she knows her daughter has learned to fly." One autumn day, when the leaves burned crimson, a group of people arrived quietly outside Muskān's bamboo classroom. They brought no cameras, no flags, no royal robes. They were villagers from distant lands, drawn by stories of the girl raised by a peahen. And they came not to witness, but to learn. To learn how a child once left unnamed could give names to hundreds of others. To learn how someone once voiceless could now listen more deeply than anyone. In the classroom, new stories took root. "Teacher," a young boy in the front row asked, "why did the peahen feed you milk?" Muskān smiled and knelt beside him. "Because some mothers don't need to give birth. They only need to see a life trembling. And their instinct to mother awakens." The class went silent. Then, "Can I be a mother too?" the boy asked. "Even if I'm a boy?" Muskān placed her hand on his chest. "Anyone who protects a fragile life, without expecting anything in return, in that moment, they are a mother." A letter from the queen. A simple handwritten note, sealed in red wax. Delivered at dusk by a quiet young woman. Muskān opened it beneath the banyan shade. Daughter. I don't call you my niece, nor my subject. I call you keeper of the flame. You brought fire from the forest, a place once deemed wild, back into the hearts of those wrapped in silk, who had long forgotten warmth. You need not return to the palace. But if ever you are tired, know there will always be a little rooftop here, for you to sit beneath and tell your stories, just as the peahen once did. With her silent embrace, Muskān folded the letter. A soft wind brushed her hair, and the peahen, now old, wings slower, tilted through the sky as if to agree. Prince Arsalan wrote a book but signed no name. It was a thin volume, bound in bark, its title inked in charcoal, The Classroom of the Nameless. Inside were stories, fragments, children's thoughts, and Muskān's reflections. He had carefully noted during each visit. The book spread across provinces, copied by monks, village teachers, wandering storytellers. No one knew who wrote it. And perhaps that's exactly what Muskān wanted. No name, but traces. No power, but presence. Then, one day, a girl from the north arrived. She had been mute since a house fire. She didn't cry, didn't speak, just watched. Muskān asked nothing. She sat beside her, placed a peahen feather in her hand, and with a piece of charcoal, drew on the ground a tree, its roots shaped by suffering, its branches reaching the sky. The girl stared, and for the first time in months, she cried. Not from fear, but from being understood. And so, the legend lived on. Not through temples, but through every child. Each child who left that bamboo classroom carried something invisible. One boy began writing a journal, because teacher Muskān said my voice is worth hearing too. One orphan girl chose not to take her life, because if a peahen can raise a child, then maybe my life isn't over yet. And the people began calling the school the place for children no one waited for. 3 years later, Muskān's reputation had crossed borders, beyond the kingdom, into neighboring lands. People began calling her things she never chose. Saint of the forest, peahen angel, the teacher without a name. But Muskān knew, the moment they give you a beautiful name, they'll try to reshape you to match it. Falsehood began to spread from places she had never been. In the western cities, merchants sold fake diaries of Muskān, with fictional tales of her conversations with the peahen. A self-proclaimed prophet created rituals to summon blessings from the mother bird. Even worse, some opened fake Muskān school branches, charging tuition in the name of love. Muskān wasn't angry. She was sad, because lies often don't come from evil, but from people craving light, who never learned how to light their own flame. A blind child taught her what to keep. One day, a blind boy was brought to her classroom. He didn't speak, didn't move. Muskān didn't push. She sat beside him every afternoon, telling gentle stories. Once there was a crooked tree. Everyone laughed at it. But when the storm came, it survived because it didn't stand too tall. A week passed. Then the boy whispered in her ear, "Teacher, I don't need to see your face. I just need to know that someone like you exists." That's when Muskān knew. What she needed to keep wasn't her name, but her truth. So instead of lawsuits or statements, She wrote a poem and taped it to the classroom door. If hearing about me brings you light, keep the light. You don't need proof. But if you use my name to make others pay, bow, or forget compassion, then you've met me, but never recognized me. Because I'm not a girl. I'm a choice. To nurture, or to possess. The queen read the poem, and sent one final message. I understand now. You don't need to protect your name, because you never lived for one. But if you ever need shelter, not for yourself, but for the children you protect, from those who want to turn you into a symbol, the palace will always hold an umbrella open. And so, Muskān created the House of Silence. Not a school, not an orphanage, just a clearing with large trees and a gentle stream, where anyone tired of being seen too much could come, not to hide, but to return to themselves. There, no one called her by name. The children named themselves instead. Mist, wind, dust, light, nothing. Because sometimes a name doesn't define, it confines. And on a rainy day, Prince Arslan visited one last time. He wore no cloak, only carried a cloth bag. Inside, a bundle of papers. I'm about to become king, Arslan said. But before that, I want to print this poetry collection. Not for sale, but as a gift to the forest. Muskān smiled. Do you remember which forest is real? Not every place with trees is a place you can come home to. He nodded. That's why I didn't print your name. Just 3 words at the end of each poem. A student of the Pihen. Spring of the 10th year of the silent house. The old forest shed its night mist onto the earth so light, it felt like someone was breathing. Muskān was now in her 40s, silver strands threading through her hair, but her eyes remained as gentle as the day she first stepped out of the leaf hut toward humanity. She was watering the vegetable beds by the stream when suddenly, a soft but resolute cry echoed from beneath the old banyan tree. The very spot where she had once been placed in a wicker basket years ago. Her heart tightened. Not because of the cry, but because of a deep intuition. As if the forest was calling her back to something her heart had already lived through. And truly, beneath the banyan tree, there was a new wicker basket. Not old like the one from years past, but clearly not from the local villagers. Inside was a baby fair-skinned, amber eyes rare and luminous, with a tiny cloth around her neck, embroidered with the name Anaya in red thread. No letter. No explanation. Only a repetition delivered by the unseen. Muskān didn't lift the baby right away. She knelt down, placed her hand near her heart, then looked up at the sky, where the mother bird used to fly each dusk. This time it's my turn, isn't it? She whispered, not needing an answer. Then she picked Anaya up, pressed her to her chest, and began to hum. A lullaby with no words. Once heard in the flapping of wings, in the wind through trees, and in the silence of souls already healed. Anaya wasn't like Muskān as a child. She wasn't afraid of people. But she didn't cling to anyone either. She rarely smiled. But when she did, it felt like the world cracked open. Something ancient being released. She didn't speak a word for 3 years. Then one day, as Muskān sat exhausted in the shade of bamboo, Anaya came, placed her hand on Muskān's cheek, and whispered, "You are my third mother." Muskān was startled. Third? Yes. The first gave birth to me. The second left me. You are the one who stayed. That sentence was a key, unlocking something Muskān had never dared to consider. That maybe Anaya's arrival wasn't chance, but the deliberate continuation of karmic ties. The child began to dream of the forest, but not one that was alive. Anaya would often wake at night, crying and saying, "Trees are dying. Birds are falling. Something is wrong." At first, Muskān thought she was scared. But then she realized Anaya wasn't afraid. She was remembering something. Not memories, but warnings. And then one day, Anaya pointed far into the distance, to where the forest once was, now being cleared for roads. "Mama, we have to go." So they set out. No entourage, no luggage. Only Anaya with her sling bag embroidered with a mother bird, and Muskān with her bamboo staff. Once a crutch, now a baton of faith. They walked through villages and towns, until they reached a land where trees were burned daily. There, homeless children huddled by piles of ash, and adults laughed when they heard tales of the forest girl. Muskān felt no anger, but Anaya did. Why don't they believe you? Because they've never hurt like we have. Why do they destroy the forest? Because they've forgotten that forests don't just give shade. They guard souls. Then what should I do? You don't need to do something grand. Just hold on to one real seed, and plant it, in the right place. The next day, Anaya asked to teach a small class. 12 children came. No pens. No paper. Just pebbles. She didn't teach letters. She taught them to place a hand on their chest, and listen to their breath. Then she said, "If this is home, then we must begin by listening to ourselves." A loudspeaker echoed across the land that was once forest, now filled with charred stumps and quiet smoke like a lingering curse. Mrs. Muskān and the girl accompanying her must leave the premises within 24 hours. This is an administrative order issued by the regional government to maintain public security and order. The crowd stirred. Some stood with Muskān. Others stepped back, fearing association. But she remained calm, as if she had heard this truth long ago in the wind. Anaya only 9 stood silently beside her. Then, as the officer extended his hand, Anaya stepped forward. One girl, one sentence, and a whole region bowed its head. She didn't shout, didn't cry. She simply looked up at the officer. Uniformed, armed, sunglasses on, and said in a steady voice, "Do you remember the first time you were told a story? Was it in your mother's arms? By an oil lamp? Under a tree, maybe? If you do, then why are you afraid of a storyteller like my mother?" Silence fell over the crowd. Then she stepped forward again, holding out a single leaf. Not as defiance, but as an offering. "I ask for nothing. But if by tomorrow this land is nothing but ash and concrete, who will tell your grandchildren that once there was a forest where you didn't need papers, only breath and love?" The officer removed his sunglasses. His eyes were red, not from emotion, but from memory. Something very old stirred, as if a mother once whispered stories to him on a cold night. He turned away. Didn't order. Didn't resist. He only said, "The girl has won." Not with reason, but with a memory we abandoned. They weren't expelled. But they chose to leave. Muskān didn't want to become a symbol of resistance. She knew true light doesn't stay, it moves forward. To kindle darker places. She took Anaya's hand. And together they walked toward the mountains. No one bid them farewell. But everyone watched. As if something sacred was passing. A year later, the place they once lived became a community learning center. There was no statue of Muskān. No portrait of Anaya. Just a wooden sign carved simply. Here once lived a woman who didn't teach letters. But everyone who learned from her knew how to live. And a child who had no ID. But proved that love is the truest identity of all. And in a distant mountain forest, they say there's a small grove tended by an old silver-haired woman and a young girl with amber eyes. There, orphans, wanderers, and the weary still come. No names needed. Just ears willing to listen. And hearts ready to remember. The very first story told to them. Closing. But not an end. The story of Muskān. The child raised by a mother bird. Who rejected a crown to build a school of compassion. Doesn't just live in books. It lives in those who know. Love doesn't require documents. If you've ever heard a gentle story at night. If you've ever been embraced by someone who didn't birth you. If you've ever seen a stranger and felt like you knew them. Then maybe you, too, are part of this story. A seed in a borderless garden of love. Questions for the audience, for pinned comment and engagement. Keycap 1. If you were given the chance to raise a child not of your blood, would you say yes? Keycap 2. Do you believe kindness can transform a land covered in ash? Keycap 3. Have you ever been loved by someone for no reason at all? If your answer is yes, share your story below. And don't forget to subscribe to Ksitigarbha Tales. Let's keep the flame alive for stories that heal.